Why can't your mind slow down tonight? Your body feels tired, yet your thoughts keep moving, replaying memories, worries, and things you wish you could just turn off. If that's how you feel right now, you're not alone. Take a slow breath in, hold it for a moment, and gently breathe out. Let your shoulders relax. Let the noise in your mind soften. Right here, your thoughts can begin to quiet, and sleep can finally begin. It is late, and the house has gone quiet around you. The last light is off. The sounds of the day, all that busy, rushing, relentless noise, have finally pulled back, the way a tide retreats from a shore. And what's left behind, once all of that settles, is something softer, something still. If you're in bed right now, I want you to feel how good that is. Wind outside, or rain, or just the wind outside, or rain, or just the breathing of a sleeping house. You don't need to hold anything right now. Whatever you were carrying today, the small anxieties and the big ones, the half-finished conversations, the lists you didn't finish, all of that is allowed to wait. Tonight, it is simply not your concern. Tonight, we are going somewhere gentle. We are going to a stable in the small hours before dawn, where the straw is golden and deep, and the air smells of warm hay and old wood. And we are going to spend some time with a horse, standing perfectly still in the dark, and think about what it means to rest. Because the horse has something to teach us tonight, something old and elegant and deeply, deeply quiet. So let your breathing slow. Let your eyes, if they're still open, close just a little more. And let's begin. To understand the horse at rest, you first have to understand the horse in motion. You have to understand what it was built for and what it was built to fear. The story of the horse begins about 55 million years ago in the dense subtropical forests of what is now North America. The creature alive back then looked nothing like the animal you might picture now. It was called Eohippus, the dawn horse, and it was small, small enough that you might almost mistake it for a large dog, standing barely 30 centimeters at the shoulder. It had padded, multi-toed feet, an arched back, and it picked its way through ancient woodland, browsing on soft leaves and forest fruits. It was cautious, nervous, probably quick to startle, and it had already learned, in whatever way animals learn things, that the world was full of things that wanted to eat it. Over the next tens of millions of years, that little forest creature would transform. The forests shrank, and the great grassland spread, vast and open under endless skies. And the animal that would become the modern horse adapted itself to survive out there in the open. It grew taller. Its toes fused one by one until all the weight of its body rested on a single, powerful hoof. A hoof that could strike hard ground at speed without shattering. Its legs lengthened, its stride deepened, its neck stretched forward and down, built for cropping grass, and its eyes, those extraordinary liquid eyes, moved to the sides of its skull so that it could see nearly 350 degrees around itself at any given moment, watching in almost every direction simultaneously. It developed a brain that processed threat instantly, a herd intelligence that meant it rarely had to think alone. When one horse startled, they all startled. When one ran, they all ran. Because out on the open plain where horses lived for millions of years, the predators were not small. They were not something you could simply wait out. Speed was the only answer the horse ever. Speed was the only answer the horse ever had. Not claws, not poison, not armor, just the explosive, breathtaking ability to be somewhere else before danger could close the gap. And so the horse evolved into a creature of permanent readiness, a creature that could never truly afford to be off its feet. Because a horse on the ground, a horse lying flat, eyes closed, muscles slack, was a horse that could not run. And a horse that could not run was, sooner or later, a horse that was dead. Millions of years of that kind of pressure leave a mark on a body. They carve themselves into the bones and the tendons and the very chemistry of the nervous system. The modern horse, standing in a warm stable in the 21st century, is still, in some deep biological sense, an animal listening for wolves, and yet it sleeps. This is where the story becomes something remarkable, because the horse, that great, nervous, exquisitely tuned prey animal, solved the problem of sleep in a way that is almost architectural in its elegance. It built, inside its own body, a system that lets it rest without ever becoming vulnerable. A kind of locked scaffold, hidden in the bones and soft tissue of its legs, that holds the whole animal upright while its mind drifts away. We call it the stay apparatus. Imagine you are standing in that stable now. The only light is a thin sliver of moonlight coming in through the high window, and it falls across the horse's back like a pale stripe. The horse is still. Its head hangs a little lower than usual, its lower lip gone soft and loose. One of its hind legs, the right perhaps, is resting so that only the very tip of the hoof touches the ground, the leg canted gently inward. The weight of its hindquarters is carried entirely by the left hind leg, and it is not trembling, it is not struggling. It requires almost no effort at all. Inside the left hind leg, something extraordinary is happening. In the horse's hind limb, the kneecap, which horse people call the patella, has been lifted and hooked over a small bony ridge on the end of the femur, the thigh bone. It locks there, caught like a latch over a gate post, preventing the stifle joint from bending. And here is the beautiful part. Because of a linked system of tendons and ligaments called the reciprocal apparatus, when the stifle is locked, the hock joint, the joint further down the leg, roughly equivalent to a human ankle, is also locked in extension. Both joints held firm simultaneously by the weight of the horse's own body, bearing down through the joint stack. No muscles are needed to hold this position. Muscles use energy. Muscles fatigue. But tendons and ligaments are different. They are dense, collagenous, almost like high-tension cable, and they can bear weight indefinitely without tiring. The stay apparatus is the horse's way of borrowing the structural properties of rope and bolt and hinge and weaving them directly into living tissue. In the forelimbs, a similar but slightly different system operates. The shoulder is held in place by a sling of muscle and tendon. The elbow and knee are stabilized by check ligaments, accessory structures that run alongside the main flexor tendons and act as backup braces, stopping the joints from folding under the horse's weight. The fetlock, that delicate-seeming joint low on the leg, is cradled in a web of suspensory ligaments and sesamoid bones, preventing it from overextending and buckling. The whole system works together the way a well-built archway works. Each piece supports the next. The weight distributes. The animal stands. And here is a thing that never stops being quietly astonishing. The horse can rotate which leg it rests. After some time, a small muscular shift, barely perceptible, and the weight moves from the left hind to the right hind, unlocking one and locking the other. Over the course of a long night, each leg is rested in turn, each joint given its quiet reprieve, while the animal barely stirs. It is sleep distributed through the architecture of the body itself, rest taken in rotation, like some slow, unconscious ceremony. You can see it if you watch a horse long enough in the small hours. The lower lip, the drooping ear, the half-closed eye. A large, warm, breathing structure that has simply decided to pause, and has paused so thoroughly that the boundary between wakefulness and sleep grows very, very thin. There are different kinds of sleep. You know this from your own life. The shallow doze on a Sunday afternoon, the solid darkness of a deep night's rest, the strange, vivid theater of a dream. Horses have their versions of these too. Research tells us that horses spend about 80% of their time on their feet, and a good portion of that time, especially in the quiet, dark hours after midnight, is spent in what we call non-REM sleep, slow-wave sleep, a state in which the brain eases its activity. The body rests, the senses soften. The horse, standing in the stable with its eyes at half-mast, its breathing long and even, that horse is in this state. It is genuinely resting. Its body is recovering. Its nervous system is doing its quiet maintenance work for full, deep REM sleep, the kind where the muscles go completely slack and the eyes move rapidly beneath their lids, the kind where the body restores itself most completely. The horse must lie down. It must allow itself that vulnerability, and in a safe environment, with familiar companions nearby, it will. It will fold itself gently onto the straw and stretch out on its side. And for 20 or 30 minutes, a minimum of that every day, it will sleep as deeply as any animal sleeps. During those moments, you might see the legs pedaling very slightly, the nostrils fluttering, a soft sound from deep in the throat, something between a sigh and a whisper. The horse is dreaming, but in the long stretches between those deep episodes, the horse stands. And it does more than simply wait. In that standing quiet, ears drooping sideways, jaw loose, the world reduced to a warm amber blur at the edge of awareness, the horse isn't something that might be the closest word we have, is dreaming on its feet. The herd, if there is one, arranges itself around this. It is one of the most tender things in nature. In a group of horses resting together, you will almost never find all of them lying down at the same time. Some ancient, unspoken agreement governs who sleeps most deeply and who stays more alert. A few will stand with the stay apparatus engaged, eyes soft but functional, ears swiveling slowly. The others lie down in the straw nearby, sentinels and sleepers, taking turns across the night. And now, think of a horse in a warm, modern stable. A horse that has been cared for, that knows the smell of the person who brings its hay, that has a companion in the next stall and a deep bed of clean straw under its feet. The wolves are not coming. The lions are not there. There is nothing beyond the stable walls tonight except the cold and the quiet and the stars. That horse is still carrying in its tendons and its instincts and its kneecap hooked over its femur 55 million years of fear. That architecture was built under siege, Every joint, every ligament, every carefully evolved locking mechanism was shaped by predators that no longer exist, in landscapes that no longer exist, under pressures that this horse will never actually face. And yet the body does not know that. The body only knows that it can rest, and that it is resting, and that the straw is warm, and the air smells of hay, and the night outside is very still. And so the standing dreamer stands, head low, lips soft, one hind hoof resting on its toe, breathing slowly in the dark, something between asleep and awake, the way you are right now, drifting in this quiet place between the story and sleep. The stay apparatus holds, the weight distributes, the legs do not need to be told anything. And the horse, this ancient, magnificent, endlessly watchful animal, lets go, just a little, just enough. It is enough. That, I think, is where we leave our horse tonight, standing in its patch of moonlight, softly dreaming, its skeleton quietly holding all that weight so its mind can float somewhere easier. There is something I find genuinely moving about that image. That rest for the horse was never meant to be safe. Rest was a gamble, a vulnerability, a calculated risk taken in brief windows between dangers. And yet the body found a way. It built a scaffold. It hooked a kneecap over a bony ridge and said, "It is all right to be still for a while. You are held." Maybe you can let that image stay with you as you fall asleep tonight. The warm stable, the pale moonlight, the steady breathing, a creature held safely by its own structure, resting in the middle of a quiet it did not ask for but has, in this moment, received. You are held, too, by your bed, by your blanket, by the stillness of this hour. You don't need to lock anything into place. You can just let go. As that story slowly fades away, let the images gently drift from your mind. There's nothing you need to remember and nothing you need to hold on to. Just allow yourself to sink a little deeper into the calm as the next peaceful story begins to unfold. The house is quiet now, or near enough. There might be the soft percussion of a radiator somewhere, or the sound of wind pressing its shoulder against a window, or just the particular silence of a room that has exhaled for the night. And you are here, in whatever position your body found its way to, and the day, with everything it asked of you, is finally, mercifully behind you. You don't have to go over it, not the moments that snagged, not the things unsaid or oversaid, not the list that will still be there in the morning. Patient as ever, you can put all of that on a shelf. Just for now, just for the length of this. Let your jaw loosen if it's been holding. Let your shoulders drop if they've been climbing toward your ears. Take a breath that goes all the way down, the kind that fills the low part of the chest, the kind that reminds the body it's safe to expand. There's a smell I want to bring you to, very gently. Dry straw, old wood, the faint tang of leather that has been oiled too many times to count, leather that has shaped itself to the curve of hands and the press of weight over years and years. It is the smell of a stable in the late evening, when the work is done and the animals are settled, and the only light is the thin amber fall of a lamp over a stall door. A horse is standing there, not moving, head low, ears drifting slightly sideways. Aware, in that way horses are always aware, but soft, resting in the way it knows best. And it already knows you're there. Before we can understand what this animal knows about us, we need to understand what it was built to know. because the horse's ability to read another creature is not a modern gift, not something that emerged from centuries of quiet domestication. It is old, older than anything we might associate with gentleness or therapy, or the warm commerce of a human and horse standing together in a paddock. It is built from survival. It is built from urgency. The horse's sense of smell is extraordinary. Where a human nose contains roughly 350 functional olfactory receptor genes, research has found that a horse carries more than 1,066, which is to say, the horse has 3 times the molecular vocabulary for smell that we do. But the architecture goes further than that. Inside the roof of a horse's mouth, tucked between the nasal passages and the palate, lies the vomeronasal organ, also called Jacobson's organ, a paired cartilaginous structure roughly 12 centimeters long in an adult horse. This organ doesn't detect ordinary airborne scent the way the main olfactory system does. It is tuned specifically to pheromones and other poorly volatile chemical compounds. The social molecules carried in sweat, in saliva, in skin, the molecules that carry information about emotional state. When a horse encounters a scent that activates this organ, you can see it happen. The animal stretches its neck, lifts its nose, opens its mouth slightly, and curls the upper lip back in a gesture called the phlegmon response, closing the nostrils to trap the compound against the organ's sensitive surface. It is, in a very real sense, tasting the emotional chemistry of the world around it. For tens of thousands of years, this system had one primary purpose: not to miss something that wanted to kill it. Out on the open steppe, where the ancestors of modern horses spent their formative millions of years, a predator approaching from downwind was a death sentence unless the horse knew it was coming. Speed was the horse's only answer to that world, and speed requires notice. Notice in the dark, across distance before the lion crouches, requires this nose, requires this organ. It was a warning system built by necessity and refined by the slow pressure of everything that ever failed to survive. The horse that came to stand beside us roughly 6,000 years ago on the Pontic-Caspian steppe in what is now Ukraine and western Kazakhstan was an animal whose entire nervous system had been shaped by that kind of attention. Every cell of its sensing apparatus was oriented outward, scanning. It was never, in any evolutionary sense, meant to relax. And yet, something happened in those 6,000 years. Something gradual and mutual and still not entirely understood. The horse turned that ancient, urgent scanning, the system that read predators, toward us. Here is something that will stay with you. In early 2026, researchers at the National Research Institute for Agriculture, Food, and the Environment in France published a study that had been, until that point, difficult to design. They wanted to know whether horses could detect human fear through smell alone, without seeing a person's face, without hearing their voice, without reading any of the body language that horses are already known to read with extraordinary precision. They needed pure chemistry. They needed fear in a bottle. They recruited 30 volunteers who watched a 20-minute segment from a horror film, collecting their sweat on cotton pads worn under the arms. Then the same people watched joyful film clips, musical sequences, comedy, and produced a second set of samples. These pads were then placed using small nets directly against the nostrils of 43 horses. No humans were present during the tests. The horses could not see a frightened person. They could not hear one. There was nothing to read except a chemical signature left in the fabric of a pad. The horses that smelled fear became afraid. Their heart rate spiked harder during sudden surprises like the opening of an umbrella. They approached familiar humans less readily. They stared longer at unfamiliar objects. That fixed, wary gaze that horses use when they aren't sure what they're looking at. The fear had passed between species through chemistry alone, without a single word or gesture or expression. When you feel afraid, your body changes. Adrenaline releases, cortisol rises. The composition of your sweat shifts at a chemical level, altering the volatile compounds it carries into the air. This is not a metaphor. Fear has a smell, and the horse's nose, that system built to catch predators on the steppe, that Jacobson's organ tucked and tuned inside the roof of its mouth, reads it. But it is not only fear. Research from the University of Sussex showed that horses can read human facial expressions and that they respond differently to photographs of angry faces than to smiling ones. An elevated heart rate, a tendency to look with the left eye, which in horses is associated with processing perceived threat. Studies on emotional voices found that horses in better welfare conditions responded with visible interest to positive human voices, and with elevated cardiac activity to negative ones. Each input, scent, expression, tone, posture, the micro-tension in a shoulder, the shortening of breath, arrives as one strand of a signal the horse processes together constantly, without effort. It does this because it was never given the option not to. Now, here is the part that takes that ancient fear reading and turns it into something else entirely. Because the information doesn't only move in one direction. In 2025, a team at the University of Vienna published findings from a study measuring cardiac activity in clients, therapists, and therapy horses simultaneously during equine-assisted therapy sessions. They found that heart rate synchronization occurred between the horses and the humans, particularly when a close relationship existed between the pair. The horse's heart rhythm and the humans began to drift toward alignment. Not always, not completely, but measurably. The bond between them was not just psychological, it was physiological. It was happening in the numbers on a cardiac monitor. Earlier research by physiologist Anne Baldwin had found something even quieter and stranger, that during certain calm interactions, a human's heart rate would drop into a frequency range it does not ordinarily inhabit, but which is common in horses, as if the human's heart had found the horse's frequency and followed it down. 16 horse-human pairs in one study demonstrated synchronized heart rate variability patterns during quiet interaction sessions. And participants came away from those sessions consistently using more positive than negative words to describe their experience, without being able to explain why. This is what happens when a creature whose entire system was calibrated to scan for danger turns that same system toward a human being sitting quietly nearby. It reads you, and it answers, not with language, not with any gesture that could be easily translated, but with a quality of presence that is like standing next to something very old and very still, something that has no agenda for you except to receive what you are. This is why horses have become central to equine-assisted therapy for people carrying trauma, anxiety, and grief. Studies have found that even children with ADHD, after several sessions of horse interaction, show above-average heart rate synchronization with the animals. Veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder report measurable reductions in symptoms after time with horses that required nothing of them but presence. The horse does not evaluate. It does not grow impatient. It does not ask you to explain yourself or account for the shape of what you're feeling. It simply reads you, and in reading you, it reflects something back that the nervous system appears to recognize, even when the mind doesn't. There is something worth sitting with in that. The idea that you do not have to translate yourself for the horse. You do not have to find the right words for what the day did to you, or locate the precise name of the feeling that has been sitting in your chest since Tuesday. The horse has already received a version of it. Through the chemistry of your skin, through the faint shift in the way you're carrying your shoulders, through something in the rhythm of your breathing that no human companion might notice, but that the horse, with its 1,066 olfactory receptor genes and its Jacobson's organ and its 4,000 years of practicing this exact skill, has already processed and filed. The prey animal became the mirror. The alarm system became the listener. 6,000 years of closeness did something neither species entirely planned. It built a channel, chemical, postural, cardiac, through which the interior state of a human being could travel, and through which a kind of calm could return. And now think about where you are right now. Your breathing has been slowing throughout this, maybe without you noticing. Your body has been doing what it does when it feels safe, settling toward its quietest rhythms, letting the vigilance go. The horse, standing in its amber-lit stable, has already done its reading. It has taken in the air, processed the chemistry, listened with the whole of its body for what the night contains, and it has found nothing to be afraid of. That ancient system, the one built on open steps when the world was full of things with teeth, has been quiet for a long time now. The horse stands and breathes, and its heart moves in its slow, even cadence. And if you were there beside it, some part of you would follow. Let it. Let your heart find its slow pace. Let your breath go long. Whatever your body was bracing for today, it can stop now. The reading has been taken. The night is quiet. You are safe. And now, as that moment quietly comes to an end, take another slow breath and settle even deeper into your rest. Let your thoughts float softly like distant clouds, while a new gentle story begins to guide you further into relaxation. Something has changed in the room. The day has finally stopped pressing. Whatever was moving quickly, thoughts, obligations, the low-level hum of being a person in the world, has slowed to something closer to water than to wind. And you are here, horizontal and warm, the particular darkness behind your closed eyes going soft at the edges. Let your body take a moment to understand that it doesn't need to be anywhere else. Your feet, your shoulders, the back of your neck, each of them allowed to release one quiet degree at a time. You don't have to rush the falling asleep part. Sleep doesn't ask for effort. It only asks that you stop trying. take a breath in, not a big performance of a breath, just a real one. Let it reach the low part of your chest, the part that often doesn't get much attention, and then let it go, slowly, until there's nothing left to release. There's a country I want to take you to tonight. It has no fixed coordinates. It smells of dry earth and cool night air and the particular sweetness of grasses that have absorbed a day of sun and are now giving it back into the dark. It sounds like the soft percussion of hooves on packed ground, unhurried, like the measured breathing of a large animal that has been walking this land for a long time and knows every inch of it. A horse is moving through the dark ahead of you, and it knows exactly where it's going. Before we follow the horse through that country, I want to show you what it sees, because the horse's eye is not like yours. It is not, in any meaningful sense, a lesser version of the human eye. It is a different instrument entirely, designed under completely different pressures for a completely different purpose. And when you understand what it is built to do, the animal moving through the dark ahead of you becomes something even quieter, even more assured. The horse has the largest eye of any land mammal on earth. Full stop. Not any horse, every horse. Those great liquid deep-set eyes that you can lose yourself in from across a paddock are, purely in terms of the size of the eyeball within the skull, the largest belonging to any creature that lives on land. And they are placed, not at the front of the face the way your eyes are, but wide on either side of the skull, angled outward, positioned high so that the animal can see around itself even while its head is down and it is grazing. The result of this arrangement is a field of vision that covers approximately 350 degrees of the world around a horse simultaneously. To understand what that means, hold your arms straight out from your shoulders and try to see both hands at once with your eyes facing forward. You can manage roughly 180 degrees, perhaps a little more with effort. The horse, without moving its head at all, can perceive nearly twice that. It can watch the ground in front of its hooves and the horizon behind its tail at the same moment. The only places it cannot see without moving are a cone-shaped blind spot directly in front of its face, extending roughly 90 to 120 centimeters outward from between its eyes, and a band of darkness directly behind its head and along its back. The eye achieves this through two kinds of vision working in coordination. Most of what the horse sees is monocular, each eye working independently, each covering approximately 200 to 210 degrees of the world on its respective side. The two fields overlap slightly at the front of the face, creating a narrower zone of binocular vision, both eyes working together, stretching about 65 degrees straight ahead, where the horse gains its depth perception. And in the dark, something else takes over. Behind the horse's retina, the light-sensitive back layer of the eye, lies a structure called the tapetum lucidum. In the horse, it is a fibrous tapetum, sheets of collagen fibrils layered and precisely spaced that act as a biological mirror. When light enters the eye and passes through the retina without being fully absorbed, it strikes these collagen layers and bounces back through the photoreceptors a second time, giving every available photon two chances to register rather than one. Under low light, this structure dramatically enhances what the horse can see. It is the reason a horse's eyes catch the moonlight and seem almost to glow when a torch finds them in the dark. Add to this the horse's ratio of rod cells to cone cells in the retina, roughly 20 rods for every single cone, compared to a ratio of 9:1 in a human eye. Rods do not distinguish color. They do not resolve fine detail, but they are extraordinarily sensitive to light and to motion. A single photon is enough to trigger one, and they work beautifully in conditions where cones are all but useless. The horse sees the dark the way you hear a sound in an otherwise quiet room. It notices things at the edge of everything. This is the eye that moves through the night ahead of you, wide, deep, seeing the world in blues and yellows and the moving shapes of things, registering your presence somewhere in its vast field without needing to turn. Those eyes and the body they belong to have carried the world a long way. The horse was domesticated approximately 5,500 years ago on the Eurasian steppe, the great open grassland stretching from what is now Ukraine through western Russia and into Kazakhstan. Before the horse, human movement was profoundly limited. Journeys that took weeks on foot could be shortened to days. Loads that no person could carry alone could be hauled across distances that had previously seemed impossible. The horizons of the known world expanded with every year that the relationship between human and horse deepened. It is difficult to overstate what the horse changed. Trade routes opened that had not existed before. Languages spread across continents on horseback. The Persian Empire, the Mongol Empire, the great sweeping campaigns of Alexander of Macedon, none of them happened without the horse. The armies of Genghis Khan, riding across a territory that covered roughly a quarter of the Earth's landmass at its peak, moved the way they moved because their horses could navigate terrain that had defeated every other military force in history. Mountains, steppe, desert, river valleys, and open plain, guided partly by the animal's own deep-seated spatial intelligence and their vision in conditions where human riders would have been largely blind. Ancient Bedouin peoples valued their Arabian horses so completely that they kept them inside their tents, not as a utility, but as companions, as something closer to family. The horse was housed where the household slept, sheltered from the cold, because losing a horse was too grave a cost to risk. In old manuscripts and illuminated histories, the horse appears again and again, not just as a working animal, but as a guide, the thing that carried its rider through unfamiliar mountain passes in the middle of the night, through snowstorms and river crossings, and the kind of darkness that removes every landmark a human eye might navigate by. There is an old account, repeated in various forms across cavalry histories, of war horses finding their way back to camp after battles in which the rider had been lost. The horse, following a trail laid in memory months earlier, navigating by scent and by some internal record of the landscape, arriving home. No instruction, no map, only the animal's own held knowledge of where it had been. That knowledge is more literal than it might sound. Horses possess what researchers describe as a spatial cognitive map, a structured, persistent internal representation of familiar territory. It is not instinct in the blurry sense. It is memory, specific, retrievable, durable over extraordinary stretches of time. Evelyn Hange, a cognitive scientist at the Equine Research Foundation in California, conducted a series of studies in the early 2000s that have not lost their ability to startle. In one experiment, horses learned to associate particular symbols and objects with a food reward. 6 years later, with no intervening training, the same horses were presented with the same prompts. They remembered 4 out of 5 sets, performing without any measurable drop in accuracy. In another experiment, a horse that had learned to categorize stimuli by shared characteristics was tested a full decade after the original training. It applied the learned rule immediately, accurately, and generalizably to entirely new stimuli it had never seen before, a decade, without a single review. Researchers studying equine spatial behavior have identified a dual processing system at work. There is an allocentric component, the horse's map of fixed space, the stable geometry of a familiar arena, paddock, or trail, which remains largely consistent from visit to visit. And there is an egocentric component, the horse's dynamic, constantly updating awareness of its own body's position within that space, relative to the objects and creatures moving within it. When you ride a horse on a familiar trail and the animal chooses a particular path at a fork without any signal from you, it is consulting that allocentric map. When it sidesteps a shadow it has never seen before, it is updating its egocentric awareness. And horses do not only map space with their eyes. Studies of horses exploring new arenas found that they follow a consistent pattern of investigation, approaching objects on the ground, sniffing them, building a scent-based record of what belongs in the space and what is new. Stallions mark territory by depositing scent along routes the herd travels, creating an olfactory infrastructure that updates and confirms the spatial map through a completely different sensory channel. The horse builds its world from multiple directions at once. After a 1-year separation, stallions have been observed immediately sorting their own mares from a much larger, unfamiliar herd, a piece of social spatial memory that requires the horse to hold, for 12 full months, a precise record of which individual belongs to which group. Former racehorses, years into retirement, recognize the particular texture and smell of a starting gate. Trail horses that have not ridden a particular route in half a decade will retrace it with quiet confidence in near darkness. And so, the horse moving through the moonlit country ahead of you is not guessing. It is reading a map it has been writing for years, a map held not in any technology, but in the long, patient architecture of its memory, confirmed at every step by what it sees in its extraordinary wide-angle vision and by what the ground says to its nose. It knows where the path turns. It knows where the ground dips into softness and where the stones begin again. It knows the smell of water before the stream comes into view. It moves through the dark the way you move through a room in your own house with the lights off, not because it cannot see, but because it no longer needs to. And this is where we stay for a little while. The dark country. The sound of the horse's steady breathing somewhere ahead, the soft fall of hooves on ground it trusts completely. Its 350-degree vision, sweeping the night without effort. Its memory, holding the whole of the path in quiet readiness. Nothing alarming has entered that vast field of vision. The tapetum lucidum catches the starlight. The navigator moves through its remembered world with a certainty that asks nothing of the night. You can follow at whatever pace feels right to you. There is no urgency. The horse is not going anywhere that isn't safe. Let the wide darkness be comfortable. Let your own breathing slow to match what you hear ahead. You have been carried through dark places before and arrived and been all right. Sleep now. The path ahead is known. With the last scene slowly dissolving into silence, your mind can stay calm and relaxed. There's no need to wake up or focus. Just keep listening as another soothing story begins, carrying you even closer to sleep. There's a smell I want to bring you, the way a scent can arrive quietly and move the whole room. Old leather, the kind that has been oiled and worked and shaped by years of use, softened by the warmth of hands and the slow pressure of weight. Behind it, something drier, hay, and the wooden boards of a stable, and the particular stillness of a very late hour, when the yard outside has gone quiet and the only sound is breathing. In that stillness, there is a horse. It is standing very still in the amber light of a single lamp. And the thing about this horse, the thing I want to slowly take apart and show you tonight, is that it is not just an animal. It is an argument, a long, patient, extraordinary argument that human beings and nature have been making together for more than 4,000 years. And every inch of it has been considered. Come in close. Let me show you what we made. The story of the horse as we know it begins on a grassland. Not a romantic, misty grassland of illustration, but the real Eurasian steppe. Vast, wind-scoured, stretching from what is now southern Russia and Ukraine far east into Kazakhstan. A landscape of near limitless sky and grass that ran to the horizon in every direction, the kind of emptiness that teaches any creature living in it to pay very close attention. It was here, in the lower Volga-Don region, that the genetic line of every modern domestic horse was born. Research published in the journal Nature in 2021, drawing on 273 ancient horse genomes collected from sites across Europe and Central Asia, pinpointed this specific zone as the homeland of our domestic horse. Not the earlier Botai culture of Kazakhstan, whose horses left no living descendants, but a new bloodline that emerged around 4,200 years ago and then spread with almost remarkable speed across the entire known world. Within a few centuries, this lineage had replaced virtually every other local horse population from Portugal to China. What drove that spread? In part, it was the Sintashta culture, Bronze Age people who had developed something no one had seen before, spoked wheels and the chariot. Two horses moving in harness before a light, fast vehicle could cover ground that armies on foot could not. And so the horse and the wheel and the people who had mastered both began to move. But the spread of a bloodline requires more than military advantage. It requires the animal itself to cooperate. And here, in 2025, a study published in Science gave us something extraordinary, a genetic explanation for exactly how the horse became the creature we needed it to be. Researchers scanned the genomes of ancient horses across thousands of years of time, searching for patterns of deliberate selection. The genomic fingerprint of humans choosing, again and again, which animals would breed. They found two signals that stood out above the rest. The first was at a gene called ZFPM1, linked in mice to anxiety levels and general well-being. This gene shows the signature of strong positive selection beginning around 5,000 years ago, the earliest phase of domestication. The people on the steppe, it seems, were already choosing a calmer horse, the less frightened one, the one that did not bolt when a hand came near. The second signal was at a gene called GSDMC, linked to spinal anatomy, body shape, and the structural strength needed to carry weight. Selection at this gene intensified between 4,700 and 4,200 years ago, producing a horse with a straighter, stronger back, a changed body length to height ratio, enhanced forelimb strength. Horses carrying this variant had an estimated 20% more offspring than those without it. That is not a small advantage, that is a wave. Within a few centuries, the GSDMC variant had swept through the population the way light fills a room. This is what the beginning looks like. 2 quiet changes, written in the deepest possible language of the body, that turned a prey animal of the open steppe into something that could carry a rider. Not by force, not by accident, by choice, made thousands of times over hundreds of years by people who understood, perhaps without any language for it at all, that they were building something. Once the foundation was laid, what happened next was nothing less than a sustained act of living sculpture. Every civilization that encountered the horse brought its own needs to the breeding yard. And the horse, already selected for docility, already capable of carrying a rider, absorbed those needs and became them. Think of the Arabian, developed by the Bedouin tribes of the Arabian Peninsula across roughly 2,500 years of meticulous selective breeding. The Arabian is perhaps the most deliberately fashioned horse in history. The desert offered almost nothing to sustain them. No green pasture, no easy water. And so the horse was bred to survive on what was available: dates, camel's milk, the small rations that a nomadic people at the edge of survival could spare. Where weakness remained in the breeding pool, the desert removed it without negotiation. Only the soundest and most enduring animals lived to produce the next generation. The Bedouin gave their breeding records not to paper, but to memory, passing them down through oral tradition across tribal lines. They cataloged their mares, always mares, who were preferred for raids because they would not nicker to the enemy's horses and betray the approach. With the same care, they gave their own genealogies. Prized war mares were brought inside the family tent at night, sheltered from weather and theft, sleeping in proximity to the children and the cooking fires. The horse that emerged from this world had a distinctive, slightly concave face, a broad forehead with a subtle outward curve between the eyes that the Bedouin called the jibba, which they believed was a blessing from God, and which modern anatomy confirms created larger sinus cavities, better suited to the dry, superheated air of the desert. It had a high tail carriage and a long arched neck, and the particular quality of a creature that has been listened to carefully for centuries. Then there is the thoroughbred. In the late 17th and early 18th centuries, 3 stallions, the Byerly Turk, the Darley Arabian, and the Godolphin Arabian, were brought from the Middle East to England, where they were bred to native English mares with the specific intention of producing a faster racehorse. The result eventually was the thoroughbred, an animal of extraordinary speed and lean-muscled athleticism, bred for the turf of English country estates and the grass tracks of the early racing world. 95% of all male thoroughbreds alive today carry the Y chromosome of the Darley Arabian alone. A single stallion purchased in Aleppo in 1704 and shipped to the north of England, whose genetic shadow still falls across every racetrack on earth. Imagine that for a moment. The sound of hooves on a cobbled stable yard in an English winter morning, the faint creak of saddle leather, the brass fixtures on a bridle catching the light, the heavy velvet of a royal enclosure at a race meeting 300 years ago, where these animals were the finest technology in the world. All of it, every race run, every trophy given, every champion's name inscribed, tracing back through time to 3 horses who carried the desert in their genes, arriving on a cold island and changing it permanently. Each breed a different answer to a different human need. All of them reshaped in DNA by the hands and intentions of people who would not live to see what they had built. And then something shifted. It was not a sudden thing. It happened slowly across the last 2 centuries or so, as the practical demand for the horse as an instrument of war and labor gradually eased. Machinery arrived. Engines replaced horses in the field and on the road and eventually in battle. And the horse, freed from those obligations, began to become something else entirely. The traits that had been bred for war, the sensitivity, the social bonding, the attunement to human presence, the docility that the ZFPM1 gene had been written into the population for 5,000 years, did not disappear when the wars ended. They remained, and in the new context of that peacetime, they became the foundation for a completely different kind of relationship. Today, horses are used in therapy for veterans carrying the accumulated weight of what they have seen. Children who struggle to locate calm in a conventional classroom will sometimes find it in the presence of a horse whose steady presence asks for no performance in return. In dressage, the oldest formal equestrian discipline, developed from the military riding schools of Europe, a trained horse and rider move together with a precision so fine that the signals are nearly invisible. A shift of weight, a breath, a barely perceptible change in the angle of a leg, and the horse turns or collects or moves into a canter, as though the thought simply arrived in both of them at once, not obedience. Something more like conversation. The horse, standing in the paddock at the edge of a field, who walks to the fence when it hears a particular voice and stands with its chin resting on the rail and its eyes half closed, that horse is carrying more than its own weight. It is carrying the accumulated result of every choice that was ever made in its direction. The ZFPM1 variant that made its distant ancestor easier to approach. The GSDMC variant that shaped its back for a rider. The desert breeders who chose endurance over everything else. The English grooms who rubbed down their charges with straw and learned a particular way a favorite horse liked to be scratched behind the ear. The years of a child learning to trust something that weighed 500 kilograms and chose every day to be gentle. This is what a living masterpiece looks like. Not marble or oil on canvas, not something fixed and finished and behind glass. Something that breathes and remembers and was built, slowly, with extraordinary patience over a longer time than any individual life, by both nature and human intention together. An animal that arrived in our world wild and remained in it by choosing, in some deep biological and emotional sense, to stay. And now, in the very late hour, it stands in the paddock in the dark. Its head is low and its breathing is long and even. The history of civilizations is folded into the muscles of its back and the quiet architecture of its spine. The memory of the desert is in the structure of its face. And whatever it knows about the night, which is more than we might guess, it is not afraid. Let that be enough for tonight. The sense that something very old and very patient has been standing in the dark for a long time, and that the dark has been perfectly safe. Let your own breathing find that pace, long, unhurried, the kind that a body settles into when it has finally stopped asking questions. As that story gently fades into the background, let your mind stay soft and relaxed. There's nothing you need to think about and nowhere you need to go. Simply keep listening, breathing slowly and comfortably as another calm story begins to unfold and guide you even deeper into rest. The night has arrived, and it has brought its particular gift with it, the gradual withdrawal of everything the day demanded. The noise, the motion, the relentless forward lean of a life in progress, all of it is receding now, the way a tide pulls back from the shore, and what it leaves behind is something simpler, something worth settling into. Let your body find its stillness. You don't need to arrange it carefully. It already knows where it wants to be, if you let it. The pillow, the blanket, the particular temperature of the air in this room, notice all of that. Let it register as comfort rather than background. Notice the weight of your own breathing, the slow rise, the longer fall, the in-breath slightly shorter than the out. There is a paddock somewhere I want to take you to. The grass there has been holding the heat of the day and is only now giving it back into the cooling air. The sky overhead is that dark, settled blue that arrives after the last of the light has properly gone. And at the far edge of the paddock, a horse is standing. It is very still, its head is low, its ears at rest. One hind leg is cocked, bearing barely any weight, 4 hooves on the quiet earth. And here is the thing I want you to understand before anything else. The ground beneath those hooves is speaking, not loudly, not in any way a person would normally notice. But the horse, this ancient, exquisitely built creature, is listening to every word. Most of us, when we picture a horse's hoof, imagine something hard, something simple. A nail at the end of a leg, designed for striking ground, built from the same stuff as a heel clacking across stone. And there is something true in that image. The hoof wall is made of keratin, dense and horn-like, produced continuously from the coronary band at the top of the hoof and worn gradually down with every mile traveled. It is tough, in the way a good boot heel is tough, resistant, durable, built for the long haul. But the wall is only the outermost shell, and it tells the smallest part of the story. No other land animal on earth walks on a single toe. When a horse places a hoof on the ground, the entire weight of that animal, up to 3 times its body weight at a full gallop, is received by a structure that, from the outside, looks almost impossibly compact. And packed inside that compact structure, behind the hard keratin shell, is something that anatomists and researchers have been slowly learning to describe with growing astonishment: a living sensory organ. Consider the frog. It is the V-shaped, slightly compressible structure that runs along the center of the hoof sole, pointing toward the toe. Its two arms flanking the groove called the central sulcus. Where the wall of the hoof is hard and largely inert, the frog is softer, made of a more elastic form of keratin that retains moisture and deforms under pressure, compressing when the hoof strikes the ground and rebounding as the leg lifts. It is the first part of the caudal hoof, the heel side, to make contact with the ground during a normal stride, landing just before the rest of the sole follows down. And it is alive with sensation. Research published in peer-reviewed anatomy journals has identified two distinct types of sensory receptor embedded in the equine hoof. The first are lamellated corpuscles closely resembling Pacinian corpuscles, large onion-shaped mechanoreceptors found clustered specifically in the heel dermis, the soft tissue directly beneath the frog and along the inner surfaces of the heel bulbs. These receptors are designed for one purpose: to convert mechanical deformation, compression, pressure, vibration, into electrical signals that travel up the nervous system to the brain. They are, in the most literal sense, listening devices. The second type are naked nerve endings, carrying the neuropeptide CGRP, calcitonin gene-related peptide, found in the solar tubules, the skin, and the digital cushion, the soft, fibrous tissue that sits between the frog and the deeper structures of the foot. These endings register finer sensory input: subtle pressure, temperature change, the particular quality of different ground surfaces. The digital cushion itself is part of an elegant hydraulic system. When the frog makes contact with the earth and compresses, it presses upward into the digital cushion, which flattens and is forced laterally outward. The motion squeezes the dense network of venous blood vessels packed within, driving blood upward through the leg back toward the heart, before the foot lifts and the cushion rebounds, drawing blood downward again. The hoof, with every single step, acts as a pump, not just a foot, a pump, a sensor, a receiver. Dr. Katrin Rutland, an associate professor of anatomy and developmental genetics at the University of Nottingham, has described the hoof as being full of nerves, so full, in fact, that its neurons sometimes communicate directly with each other about hoof-related conditions, without routing the signal up to the central nervous system at all. And she has observed that the hoof is sending signals to the brain continuously, not only during movement, but during stillness. The central nervous system, she points out, must know where every part of the animal is at every moment, even when it is simply standing in the dark. Now, we reach the part of the story that changes how you see the horse standing in that paddock. The Pacinian corpuscles buried in the horse's heel dermis, those onion-layered pressure-sensitive clusters gathered around the frog's central sulcus, are tuned in the equine foot to a specific frequency range. Research on equine sensory receptors has placed their sensitivity at low-frequency vibrations in the region of 20 to 50 hertz, the lower end of what we call infrasound. This is frequency range well below the threshold of human hearing. It is the register of distant thunder, of underground tremors, of the seismic pulse that moves through bedrock and soil hours before a storm front arrives, or, as research increasingly suggests, hours before an earthquake. What this means is worth sitting with. The horse, standing on the ground, is receiving a continuous feed of low-frequency vibration from the earth beneath its feet. Not at the level of conscious hearing, not through the ears, but through the heels, through the frog, through the sensory machinery of the hoof, translating ground vibration into neural signal and transmitting it upward through the body in a steady, low-level stream of information. Researchers studying equine biomechanics have noted something that sits at the edge of the scientifically provable. Observations that galloping horses will begin to decelerate before they reach areas where underground terrain changes significantly, where large subsurface rocks or boulders create different acoustic signatures in the earth. The suggestion is that the vibration-sensitive Pacinian corpuscles in the hooves are picking up the reflected waveforms of the horse's own footfalls, bounced back from the underground landscape, and feeding that information forward in the stride. The horse, in this reading, is using its own movement as a kind of sonar, reading what lies beneath the surface through the echo of its own weight on the ground, and it does not stop at terrain. Prior to Hurricane Charlie making landfall in Florida, farm owners and veterinarians reported markedly increased agitation in horses and cattle up to 24 hours before the storm arrived. The radar at that point still showed nothing alarming. Infrasound, vibration below hearing frequency, travels through the ground from storm systems hundreds of kilometers away, arriving as a subtle but continuous signal in the earth that a horse standing in a field on a calm afternoon will receive through its heels long before any cloud reaches the horizon. When barometric pressure begins its pre-storm drop, affecting the pressure inside the hoof's dense vascular network, the horse's body registers this not just as a change in the atmosphere, but as something physical, a shift in the world it is standing in. Studies involving GPS-collared livestock near active seismic zones have found clusters of unusual restlessness in the hours before certain earthquakes, behavior that aligns with what we would expect from animals receiving low-frequency ground tremors through their feet. The horse's hoof, in this sense, is a seismograph, a biological instrument 60 million years in development, calibrated to the frequency of the living earth. Here is what moves me most about all of this. The same hoof that developed to read approaching predators through ground vibration, the tremor of a running predator's feet transmitted through the steppe soil, arriving as a faint, urgent signal through the heels of a grazing horse a second or two before the eyes or ears confirmed the threat. That same structure now stands in a safe paddock, in a world where no lions are coming, and it has not stopped listening. It can't. The instrument doesn't switch off. The Pacinian corpuscles in the heel dermis don't go dark because the threat has passed. The hoof reads the ground because reading the ground is what it is. And so, on a quiet evening, in a paddock where nothing alarming is occurring, the horse, standing with its head low and its eyes half closed, is receiving a continuous gentle report from the earth beneath it. It is receiving the settling of the soil after yesterday's rain, the particles of ground finding their new arrangement as moisture evaporates slowly upward. It is receiving the micro tremor of a tractor on a road 2 fields away, a low-frequency pulse that moves through clay and loam and arrives at the hoof as the faintest possible shiver. It is receiving the particular quality of silence that descends when all human activity has stopped for miles, when the night has grown completely still and the only things moving are small and distant and unthreatening. This silence has its own vibration. It has a frequency, and the horse standing in it knows the difference between that silence and the one that precedes a storm. There is one more thing. Hidden in the anatomy of the frog, alongside the opening of the Pacinian corpuscle clusters, are the outlets of small scent glands, microscopic structures that release a chemical secretion onto the ground surface as the frog makes contact with it during each step. The horse, as it walks, is not only reading the earth, it is riding in it, leaving, with every footfall, a chemical signature that other horses can read in turn, a record of who passed and when and in what state. The hoof is simultaneously a receiver and a transmitter, a reader and a writer, an instrument that takes in the world and marks its passage through it, step by quiet step, and now it is still. 4 points of contact with the dark earth, and through each one, the slow, steady, barely there conversation of a landscape at rest. No alarm, no urgency, only the deep, ancient pulse of ground that has been here for a very long time and will be here long after tonight. The horse receives it and relaxes just a little, further into the dark. So do you. Whatever the day left in your body, the tension behind the eyes, the held breath in the chest, the places that are still bracing for something that has already passed, let it go through you now. The way of vibration travels through the ground, not caught, not held, just passing through and gone. You are in contact with the earth tonight in your own way. You are resting on something solid. The surface beneath you is holding everything. You don't have to do any of the holding. Let the quiet have its frequency. Let your breathing slow into the low register, the long, even, barely there rhythm of a body that has finally stopped asking questions and started simply receiving what the night has to offer. Sleep well. If this story gave you somewhere quiet to settle tonight, I would be so glad if you pressed the like button below. It takes 1 second, but it helps Pillow Trace find its way to other people who need a soft place to land at the end of a long day. And if you'd like another story waiting for you the next time the night needs filling, please do subscribe. We will always be here in the dark, listening to the quiet with you. Good night.